Hello, world. Welcome to another Webinar Wednesday event. I'm here with Miss Mira Lutz. She is the education coordinator from CDOC Society, and that's in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State in the United States. Welcome, Mira. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be talking with you today.
Yeah, honestly, once I heard about CDOCs, I was hooked. I want the rest of the world to know about CDOCs and to know about you and the education component of CDOCs. So where should we even start? Do you want to introduce what CDOCs is and then also just let us know how you got to this position today?
Yeah, absolutely. So CDOC Society is a program of the Karen C. Dreyer Wildlife Health Center in the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis in California. And they have programs, 8 different satellite programs around the world, and one is based in Africa. It's called Gorilla Doctors. So that's another example of One Health work that's happening there. It's a mixture of veterinary medicine intervention with a wild population of mountain gorillas. And that's been ongoing since the work of Diane Fossey. So we work here in the Pacific Northwest of Washington State, and we work with the health of wildlife in the Salish Sea. There's a big inland sea here connected to the Pacific Ocean, the northeastern Pacific. And we work with wildlife species here that are threatened or endangered, or help to get those listed as threatened or endangered so that they can get protections in policy. So we work very much translating science. We fund science, we conduct science, and we translate that science for policymakers so they understand what the data is telling us about the health of the Salish Sea and its wildlife. And what affects the sea and its wildlife affects everything else. We all live uphill from the ocean, no matter where we are in the world. So that's what CDOC Society does. We do some scuba diving, we do some veterinary work with the wildlife here, disentanglements of sea creatures like sea lions, helped get the tufted puffin listed as endangered, the pinto abalone. So it's kind of like every part of the food web, from plankton on up to our beloved southern resident killer whales and the other killer whales that swim our waters. So that's what CDOC Society does. It's part of a big family of the vet med school at UC Davis.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that overview. And then how did you become the education coordinator? Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, you bet. So, gosh, I was just finishing a master's degree in marine and estuarine science when I learned about this position. Before that, I was a science teacher in public schools and taught a lot of marine science courses, and then taught, K through 12. So lots of writing of curriculum and teaching and working with other educators and hundreds of students over the years. And my undergrad was also in biology with a concentration in marine science. So it's kind of this unusual mix of being both an educator. I have a teaching certificate and background, but also a scientist. So it's like this position was made for my background and experience, and it's been just really awesome to be able to work with the visionary team that is CDOC Society. A wildlife biologist / wildlife vet and communications manager and research assistant. And it's a real small team. Our office manager, we all do a little of everything. We all run boats, we all tend dives. Some of us are divers. And then I get to work with teachers and help teachers teach kids science and meet their required science standards using the sea next door. So it's very localized instruction and curriculum. And it also has this component of understanding how humans are connected with wildlife health, and has this conservation project as the culminating piece, so that kids are getting involved in restoration projects and healing the estuaries where the rivers meet the sea, where most of our population centers are. So yeah, that's what I do and kind of how I got into the role.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Now everybody can see why we wanted to talk to each other, because you have an incredible background and Sea Docs Society is an amazing organization. So you mentioned two things. You mentioned K to 12, and just for the benefit of everybody, because K to 12 is said in North America, but K to 12 means anywhere between 5-year-olds and 18-year-olds. So primary and secondary school education.
Mm-hmm,
The other thing that you mentioned was everybody is upstream from the ocean. Can you dive into that a little bit more? And pun intended.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually a song written by a local musician about that, uphill from the ocean, or the ocean is downhill from everything, or something like that. And it's so it's really cute, kind of folk song, but it really hits home that everything we do, no matter where we are, well, our the chemicals we use to clean our homes, the treatments we put into our lawns, our yards, if whether we drive, how we clean our cars and fix our cars, if we let the oil leak, if we use public transportation or bike, all of those things affect the ocean downhill from us, because when the rains come, they wash what we do into the streams, and those streams eventually end up in the oceans, no matter where we are, pretty much. Especially here, we're all in this great big watershed, where when the rains fall, everything all around Vancouver, British Columbia, Seattle, Washington, and all the way down to Olympia in the north end of the sea in Canada, it all goes into this same body of water. And that's affecting our killer whales, which are these apex predators of the ocean, right? But they are getting so many toxins in them that they are, their immune systems are being compromised by those persistent organic chemicals that are getting into their systems. And when they go to nurse their calves, especially if it's a first calf for a mother, then that fat in the milk has those toxins in it, and they're being kind of like offloaded into the calf. Like high fat milk is bringing this load of toxins that were stored in the fat of the whale, and suddenly they're free. And that's changing the immune system and the ability to fight off parasites and diseases that killer whales used to be able to fight off. So they're struggling, and our southern resident killer whales here are endangered. And so we do it to help with killer whale health.
Wow. And for the benefit of everybody listening, so you said two things that I think we should dive into a little bit more. You said watershed and you said apex predator. Can you explain that for the general public, please?
Yeah, you bet. So I would ask my students that often, like, what do you think a watershed is? And they're like, a shed, like a garden shed, maybe, where water's stored. But if you can imagine, or if you can even like take your hands and make like this with your knuckles. If you can see, I'm just clasping my hands together, and my knuckles are symbolizing mountain tops. So if those are mountain tops and ridges, that are my knuckles on my hands. If rain comes, it's going to drain into all of those crevices and flow downhill. And the bodies of water that receive those streams and those trickles, all of that from the body of water that it runs into, all the way to the ridges that divide the watershed, that's all the watershed. And so a place that sheds water into a single body of water below. Yeah. So that often is an estuary, where the rivers that get all of those streams washing the water down end up in the sea. Where they meet the sea is the estuary. And that's where all of those things that happen in the watershed where we live end up. And so that could be car oil. And locally here, salmon is a very big culturally important species, Pacific salmon. A lot of people's lives depend on it, especially the indigenous peoples here. I'm interviewing a tribal member with the Lummi Nation in just a couple hours. And they actually went out because this killer whales are struggling. There was a baby killer whale that was struggling in 2019 named Scarlet, or J50, and she was struggling because of the toxins in her body. She wasn't able to fight off disease. She was starving, and these Lummi elders, leaders of the Lummi tribe, came out and brought their fisheries vessel out, and they fed live Chinook salmon to the whales, something they had never done before, with a ceremony, just to say, you're our relations in the sea. We're here, and we're not going to just let you die and slip away. And we want to show that to you by bringing you Chinook salmon, which are the largest of all Pacific salmon. And the killer whales here depend on the Chinook salmon almost exclusively. So that's one effect of what happens uphill from the ocean, flowing into the ocean through the estuaries and affecting every part of the food web, all the way up to the apex predator, which is the top predator in the sea. So nothing attacks killer whales. There's another type that even eats sharks, and even great white sharks. So killer whales they're pretty powerful and amazing predators. And they're indicating that every part of the food web that is eaten by them or eaten by what they eat, on down to the plankton, little floating microscopic creatures in the water, are struggling too, because that is showing, they are showing, hey, we're not healthy. That means the food web isn't healthy. So something needs to change, and people are waking up to that. And this education is part of that picture, raising a new generation who understands that our health is intertwined with ocean health. It's intertwined with those killer whales and the salmon and everything they eat too. So.
Yeah, excellent story. I'm happy that we were able to share that with the world. And I particularly liked how you had the baby named Scarlet /J and then a number.
Yeah, 50. Mm-hmm.
J50.
Yeah. So the killer whales, when they're born here, when they survive the first few months, because they don't always, and then the whale museum nearby will put out a invitation to name the whale, and so they'll get a name from somewhere, and sometimes that's a tribe that names it, sometimes it's a school group that names it, and so all of the whales here have a letter and a number, which signifies what family group they're in or pod, and their birth order in that pod. So yeah, we have J, K, and L pods here, led by mothers or grandmothers or great grandmothers, and their children stay with them their whole lives.
Wow. And what's the life expectancy of an orca?
Well, in the wild, males will live between like 30 to 60 years, and females will live between like 50. And there was a great grandmother here who was 103, estimated to be 103 years old. There's another in her 80s. So it's usually less than that, but the females can live a lot longer, and up to 100. So
wow, it's such a range.
yeah, their life cycles are kind of similar to ours too. Like they can reproduce by the time they're teenagers. They go into that senescence by the time they are in their late 30s or early 40s, and don't reproduce anymore. But unlike us, but unlike other animal species, they are important far beyond their reproductive years. And that's because these matriarchs hold this knowledge of where to find the food, where to find the salmon, how to avoid certain areas. And they hold these memories, and they lead and they help teach the offspring how to survive and how to support each other. They're very interactive, kind of like primates are very interactive and very emotionally intelligent. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I was working with elephants. That's what it reminds me of. Yeah. And same age ranges, like much later than a lot of people would expect.
Right.
So given that One Health is so broad, when you speak to children about the importance of the ocean and the importance of how our actions relate to the ocean and the environment at large, what's the reception? What do you get as feedback from the students and also from the teachers?
You know what? Kids are easy to teach about the connections of One Health. They get it. Like they're already feeling connected to animals and to nature. As long as they're given half a chance, it's almost like you have to unteach children how to understand that, which we unfortunately do a lot, by keeping them indoors and keeping them connected to electronics so much. But here we are on Zoom, and they had to learn that way in the pandemic year and a half so far, remotely and connected to screens much of the day. And so I think that, it's really reaching in and saying, hey, no, we really need to get kids outside. We really need to have kids connected. So kids are very receptive. They love to learn about the sea and sea creatures. If you bring up killer whales and killer whale babies, it's pretty hard to not have some kids, there'll be very few kids who aren't interested. So there's a great response from kids, and they want to do something that's meaningful, that is real. And so often, I think in teaching science, it's kind of like they are given, if they get to do experiments, the outcome is already known. And in this curriculum that I help teachers to learn how to teach, they ask questions that are their own questions, and they are gathering data authentically and interpreting the data themselves. So for instance, kids recently in Tacoma did a salmon stream survey. They had baby salmon. They needed to find a place to release the baby salmon that would be healthy for them. And so they had to determine which spot in the stream was a good place for them to be. And so they worked with professionals.
Yeah, how old were those kids?
They were grade 5, so that's 10 and 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And they worked with scientists in the community to gather field data and help them analyze it. And then they voted on a release site, and then they got to watch the salmon virtually, but live, being released in their spot of choice. So it's something right in their neighborhood. It's something that is meaningful because these are kids who may have a commercial fisherman or woman as a parent or family member, or if they're in the tribes, they're all dependent. They're all salmon people around here. And so it's something real. It's something right now and relevant. And the kids feel like they're making a difference, that they're not only being made aware of environmental issues, but they're seeing that there are experts already on the case, and there's mysteries to be solved that they can help solve. And then they can contribute to the actual conservation, the actual restoration themselves, so that they're not just going, oh, there's so much hopelessness in the world environmentally, but yeah, there's some mistakes we've made over the past couple hundred years here, but there's people working on them. That's scientists, that's tribal members, and experts, and governmental organizations and government agencies. There's so many people working on it, and we can be a part of that. So it builds hope and inspiration instead.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of having any and every scientist and engineer out there going and being role models for students, because it brings science and engineering to life. Right?
Yeah, it really does. I love that there's so many different parts of science and engineering that they don't have to be the PhD on the job. They can be the technician who's operating the remotely operated vehicle underwater, that's gathering the data. They could be the person who's building those ROVs. It's or they can be the person communicating about that to the public. There's so many ways. The person making the art to display, to educate the public in another way. So there's so many ways you can tap into strengths of kids. and show them that they can all make a huge difference. They don't have to be the scientist to do that, but they're
Yeah,
contributing to science.
I love it. And that's the One Health approach, right? It's teamwork.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. So, just two last questions for you. Not every country has access to killer whales. So, what advice do you have to somebody who lives, say, on the other side of this planet, or in a land-bound country, in getting the kids engaged in One Health activities?
I think that this model of bringing to light in the form of mystery or a problem to solve some kind of issue with their own environment. It doesn't matter where you are, if you're on an estuary like we are here in the Salish Sea, or if they're in the middle of a desert, that there is something that they could investigate kind of as nature detectives, and then work with experts in the community, connect, create this team that's not just the kids in the classroom and the teacher, but expands to open it up to the community so they can have multiple people to learn from, and then take part in the investigation of that phenomenon or mystery, and then take part in, after they recommend actions to take to help that issue, take part in that actual conservation action themselves. So I think that getting them involved hands-on, so they're getting dirty, wet, dusty, whatever, smelling and feeling the ecosystem wherever they are. We'll have we call the kids Salish Sea heroes who complete that kind of a project here, but they would be, they would be desert heroes, they would be mountain heroes. It doesn't matter where you are. There, pretty soon we'll have a whole world with an army of citizens who understand their connection to the health of wildlife and the health of the people and the health of the ecosystems that support us all.
Wonderful. Last question is, if somebody wants to get into the One Health space, and they're at the undergrad level, or even they finished a graduate program, but they're struggling to get into the One Health space for work, what advice do you have?
Oh, that's a really good question. I didn't even really know what One Health was before I started working for a CDOC society. And so it wasn't, here I am working for the One Health Institute for University of California, but I didn't know that that was a thing until I got here. Like I said before, everybody can contribute to One Health. And that is getting involved with using your own strengths. So maybe you're an artist, and that art can bring awareness to climate change. And that can help wildlife and livestock and human populations to, to work in a smarter, more sustainable way with them. Really connecting with people who are doing this kind of work. Whether that is an internship that you seek out, connecting with somebody whose work you're interested in, and just build a relationship. Really, it's about building relationships, and so that you can get involved with the kind of work that inspires you and makes you dream and have hope for the future. Because there's a lot of mistakes to fix, and it's going to take a village to fix the ones in our own villages. Yeah.
Global village. Thank you so much, Mira, for this wonderful conversation. It's been such a pleasure to have you here.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me and for all of the wonderful work you're doing with One Health lessons. I just really am impressed and so grateful that you're putting that out into the world. So,
well, thank you. It takes a global village.
It does. We're part of it. We're teammates.
Awesome. Onwards and upwards, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.